When I was younger, I was told I was never allowed to leave my room after 9 p.m. and one night I discovered why. Part 2. Submitted by You Shall Not Pass 121. The heart lay, beating slowly. I could see the blood coursing through the weary veins, some of it was leaking onto the floor and was somehow beginning to surround the candles. I stood transfixed, something was happening to me. The scraping was getting closer and closer, and I could feel a presence behind me, but I couldn't turn around. I willed myself with all my strength to turn around, but I just couldn't. I was utterly mesmerized by the heart, helpless. Tears began to stream down my face when I felt something brush past my leg, a long single strand of gray hair. But I couldn't see who it was, my eyes were fixed on the heart, and I was unable to move them. What the hell was happening? I tried to speak, but only a small whimper managed to escape my parched lips. Then, I saw her. An old woman, limped slowly into view. She hobbled past me as if I wasn't there, straight over to the beating heart. It was a hideous sight. She picked up the heart as I watched feebly and licked it, her elongated tongue grazed the majority of the heart. Blood began to trickle down her monstrous lips, all the way down her bulging neck. It was then that I saw her iron teeth. They were blackened, sharp, and permanently stained by what looked like old speckles of blood. She bit into the heart, hard, and started chewing. The noise, my God, the noise. I'd never heard anything like it. The crude smacking of her lips, the horrible crunching of the heart muscle, was unbearable to my ears. She suddenly stopped and looked at me, really saw me, like she didn't properly see me until that moment. She looked deep into my eyes, and it was then that I started to hear whispers, but I couldn't make out anything tangible. It was a plethora of voices all around me. Baba Yaga began to walk towards me, her deformed stance made even more horrific by the bulge that was her back. She clutched the heart in her blood-covered claw, droplets of blood fell on the floor. I was still immobilized to the spot by whatever trance she put me in. I could do nothing. She got so close to me that I could smell the foul air that permeated from her body, her mouth. She held the heart in front of me, in front of my face. She held it so close that I could smell the familiar scent of blood, a metallic smell. She smeared the bloody heart all over my face. I couldn't even scream, I was completely incapacitated. Some of it got into my mouth. She cackled then and dropped the heart to the floor, where it melted. She looked at me and whispered, "You are mine now." Then she was gone, and I fell to the ground, my breathing was erratic, and I passed out. I awoke a short while later, utterly dazed, and I could barely see anything in front of me. When my vision settled a little, I looked at my hands, and they were completely covered in blood. The blood dripped from my fingers onto my legs, and that was when I saw a puddle of deep red. My vision was still somewhat blurry, but I thought I could make out a body lying on the floor a few feet in front of me. I looked all around me and panicked. I wasn't on the landing anymore. I was in a red room. There were no doors and no windows, and it was just me and the still body. Candles lined the perimeters of the room, and nothing else was there. Next to the body, a little further away, lay a book. A different one. I was too far away to see it clearly, but I knew it wasn't mine because mine was laying right next to me. I stood up slowly, unsure of my balance, but my legs held. I wiped my hands and began walking over to the body, to the book, my body completely overtaken by fear. My mind raced. I just didn't know what to do, how to get out. For once in my life, I really just wished that I'd stayed in my bedroom. Maybe my parents did all of this to protect me from her. But my curiosity was going to get me killed, or worse. Why didn't I just stay put? I moved over to the book. I wanted to avoid the body laying close by as much as possible, but I knew I would have to look sooner or later. I shivered, tears began to form around my tired eyes, and I wiped them away. When I edged closer, I saw the book was open. The writing was illegible to me, it was all in Russian, but it appeared to be some kind of spellbook. It contained strange symbols and speckles of blood covered some of the pages. There were drawings in this book that were inconceivable to me. Drawings of torn open human bodies, drawings of hooded figures with their hands covered in blood holding human organs. Drawings of horned creatures devouring babies and children. One drawing, in particular, depicted the Baba Yaga surrounded by cloaked beings. All were kneeling around her in a circle. In front of her was a cooking pot, and one of the cloaked beings held a child in some sort of sacrificial stance. It was the most horrifying thing I'd ever seen, aside from Baba Yaga herself, of course. I shut the book and threw it. Another part of her story that I should mention is that people have tried and failed to vanquish her. The stories about her span centuries and she is believed to be one of the most elusive creatures ever encountered. She can be metaphorically shackled though, she can be trapped by those who summon her for their own gain. But even then, those who bind her with a spell like that always end up paying a high price for trapping Baba Yaga. For using her powers. In the stories I read, she terrorized villages that mistakenly summoned her or stumbled upon the disused hut that was supported by the blood-covered chicken legs in the middle of a deep and thick forest. A hut she inhabited, where she ate the hearts of children and consumed their souls. No one was ever able to truly destroy her. Not in those stories. It was hopeless, and I was utterly helpless. I didn't know how I was ever going to escape, and I really wanted to find my parents to find out what in the world was going on and why this was happening. Did they summon her? Was this their doing? Why? The Baba Yaga never rests. Once she is summoned, she never truly goes away. She never leaves those who have encountered her alone. I was crying when suddenly, the dead body in front of me twitched. I was frozen to the spot. The body twitched for several minutes before it slowly got up. It got up. There was blood all around it. I whimpered as it turned its blood-soaked face toward my fear-stricken one. I sat still for a moment before it began to slowly shuffle toward me, its arms reaching out. As it edged closer to me, I screamed till my throat was red raw. The body, the animated corpse. It was my mother. The red room was small, quite rectangular, so I didn't really have many places to run to. The good thing was, the corpse that was my mother was slow, so I was able to get away from her by walking to the other side of the room. I knew that I couldn't do that forever, and it wasn't sustainable, but for now, it would do. I just couldn't bear to look at my poor mother's face. "Mom, please." I pleaded with her. "Mom, what happened to you? Where's Dad?" I knew that she would be incapable of answering my questions, due to the fact that she no longer possessed a tongue. Could she understand me? I didn't know. This clearly wasn't my mother anymore. She was staggering towards me, her stance likened to that of a zombie. Hell, she was a zombie. Blood oozed out of her mouth, her teeth black. Her eyes were entirely devoid of any life, any emotion. She was empty, a husk. All that was left of her was the awful essence of the Baba Yaga. These were the consequences I was telling you about. Let me tell you a bit about my mother. She was always kinder to me than my father was. Sometimes when my father would order me to my room even though I was hungry and they failed to feed me, I'd catch these little sympathetic glances from her toward me. Little sideward looks of pity. Still, she did very little to help me. My mother was always the one to leave me food outside my room, though, always the one leaving me bottles of water to drink, especially in the summer when temperatures were stifling, and I was still confined. I always had a feeling that my father attempted to forbid these somewhat kinder gestures, but she continued. I really appreciated her for that. But other times, she could be just as cruel as my father was. She could be unkind, and that would confuse me. She was the one that bestowed the gift of the Russian book that first introduced me to Baba Yaga. My parents barely ever spoke to me, aside from the usual "go to your room, Anna," or "stop crying, Anna." So when I received the book, I took it as a kind gesture from my mother. I had no idea that it would turn into my being pursued and haunted by something that was supposed to be a simple, kind deed. The receiving of a good book. How was I supposed to know that this would happen to me? All I ever yearned for was love, and I never got it. Was she cruel to me? Yes. Did she love me? I doubt it. Nevertheless, she was still my mother, and I loved her. I never wanted to see her like this. The dead thing that was my mother continued to pursue me in slow, deliberate motions, but I managed to dodge her advances every single time. I knew I had to get out of the red room, but how? I didn't even know where I was. I was sure I was no longer in our house since we didn't have any rooms that resembled this nightmare. My thinking was shrewd, fast. I picked up several candles and threw them at the corpse and watched as it writhed in agony, but still, it was relentless. It just kept coming and coming, trying to grab me at every turn. Strangely, as I threw the candles at my mother's corpse, I noticed that nothing else in the room was set alight. The candles would hit the corpse and then just extinguish after hitting the floor. It wasn't normal, but then nothing was normal here. I decided to try something else. I ran towards the scattered books. I picked up my fairy tale book, and I quickly moved toward the spell book before my dead mother got too close to it. I picked it up, thinking the reanimated corpse of my mother was the doing of this spell book, so I wanted to burn it. I tried to set it on fire, but it just wouldn't burn. I picked up several candles and tried to set it ablaze, but nothing happened. The book stayed perfectly intact. Then suddenly, I heard a piercing shriek. It shook the room like an earthquake. The dead body of my mother fell to the floor, lifeless once more. The red room crumbled around me, and as I shut my ears to stifle the sound, I noticed they were bleeding. I fell to the ground, the books scattering around me. Before I lost consciousness, I vaguely remember Baba Yaga flying across the collapsing room towards me on her mortar, aided by the pestle that also doubled up as her wand. Her spindly knees touching her crooked chin as she flew. I saw her blood-soaked mouth and her wide, demonic eyes coming toward me as my own eyes fluttered shut. I awoke startled, disorientated, and completely engulfed by fear. I touched my face, my eyes, my mouth, everything was still there, still attached. I felt for my pulse, it was beating, albeit erratically. My heart was still intact. I looked around me and cried out. I was in a forest, a deep birch forest surrounded by thick trees. The body of my mother was there too. It lay, surrounded by candles not too far away from me. The body was limp, unmoving, dead, but I was cautious about taking my eyes off of it, just in case. My attention was stolen away by a slow but monotonous chanting, the same chanting that I heard when I was back at the house. Amongst the chanting, I could also hear a plethora of different sounds, whispers, and cries. It was the cries and whispers of children, men, and women. I could hear the anguish in the voices of those lamenting. I stood up, and that was when I saw the hut. The hut that was supported by giant blood-covered chicken legs. I stared at it, horrified. The sight was picturesque, it looked just like the painting at the house and frighteningly resembled the illustrations from my book. I took a step backward when I saw its legs begin to move.